My son, my only child, called me a loser to my face at a packed restaurant. He did it in front of my ex-wife and her new successful husband. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just sat there and took it. But 1 week later, he found himself with no car, no money, and an eviction notice on the door of his luxury apartment. And that's when his mother called me screaming in panic. If you think family should be built on respect, not entitlement, hit like and subscribe because you're going to want to hear how this ends. The air in the restaurant, a place called the Gilded Steer, was as thick and heavy as the expensive sauces they served. It felt like it was clinging to my throat. Everything about the place was designed to scream wealth, from the massive crystal chandeliers that hung from the ceiling like giant glass jellyfish to the plush wine-red leather booths that seemed to swallow you whole. It was a symphony of money, but to me it was all just noise. My ex-wife's new husband, Todd, waved his hand, the Rolex on his wrist, catching the light. "Jack, you have to try the tomahawk steak," he said, his voice slick and polished. "It'll change your life." I just nodded. Todd was a stockbroker, a man who believed that everything, including enlightenment, could be ordered off a menu. He looked, talked, and even breathed like a rising stock chart. Sleek, confident, and utterly hollow. My ex-wife Brenda placed her hand on his, a gesture that was less about affection and more about showing off her prize. "He's right, honey," she cooed. "Jack's been living so minimally these days." "Haven't you? Jack, you've probably forgotten what the good things taste like." She said the word minimally like it was a terminal illness. It had been 5 years since our divorce, and she still couldn't grasp my decision. After my wife Leo's mother passed away from cancer, I sold the construction firm I had built from the ground up. I had enough. Enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life, and enough of the 5 a.m. meetings and the soul-crushing stress. I had promised my dying wife Sarah that I wouldn't let the job consume me, that I would live. Brenda called it quitting. I called it keeping a promise. "Well, I think it's awesome," my son Leo chimed in, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Todd, his eyes shining with admiration. I mean Todd's style. Decisive, always moving forward. Leo was 24, but in that moment he looked like a teenager desperate for the football captain's approval. He'd dropped out of his business degree claiming the whole system was outdated. His own path forward so far had been paved entirely with my money. Speaking of moving forward, Leo said, his voice rising with excitement, "I want to talk about Momentum Digital." That was the grand name for his startup, an idea that existed only on a handful of PowerPoint slides. The waiter arrived and took Todd's order with a bow. I asked for a simple filet mignon, which earned me a disapproving frown from Brenda. As soon as the waiter left, Leo launched into his pitch. He spewed a waterfall of empty buzzwords he'd learned from online videos. Synergy, optimization, untapped markets. I could see Todd nodding along, pretending to be interested, but his eyes kept drifting towards the bar. And that's why I need the initial seed funding. Leo finished almost out of breath. Just $50,000 to get it off the ground. To make the vision a reality. A heavy silence fell over the table. Todd took a slow sip of his wine. "Leo," he began, his voice dripping with fake sympathy, "the idea has passion. I love that. But the market right now is volatile. A new venture is a big risk. Maybe in a year or two." It was a polite no. A professional no. But Leo didn't see it that way. His face fell and his hopeful gaze swung to me. The backup plan. The bank of Dad. I met his eyes and held them. "Leo," I said calmly, "what's your plan to acquire your first customer?" He blinked. "Well, social media ads. Targeting local businesses." I pressed on. "What's your budget for that? What's your projected conversion rate? What's your customer acquisition cost versus their lifetime value?" His confidence crumbled. I'm still working out the specifics, but the potential is huge. I kept my voice even. Potential isn't a business plan. You're asking for $50,000 with no clear path to revenue. You haven't even registered the business name yet. I checked. I wasn't trying to humiliate him. I was trying to make him think. But all he saw was rejection. In front of his hero. In front of his mother. His face flushed a deep, angry red. And then he detonated. He didn't shout. He spoke just loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear every single calculated word. See, this is why I didn't ask you. You're a loser. You just ran away. You sold your company, your legacy to sit around and do nothing. Todd isn't a loser. He's a winner. He builds things. The ambient chatter of the restaurant seemed to die. I could feel dozens of eyes on our table. Brenda stared down at her plate, saying nothing to stop him. And Todd, the winner, just smirked. A tiny, barely perceptible smile of pure satisfaction. I didn't say a word. I didn't argue or defend myself. I simply and quietly placed my knife and fork down on the table beside my untouched steak. The meal was over. Everything was over. The drive from the restaurant to Leo's high-rise apartment was the longest drive of my life. The silence inside my Mercedes was heavier than anything said at the table. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a silence filled with jagged edges, each passing second, a fresh cut against the frayed bond between a father and son. Leo sat in the passenger seat, staring intently at his phone, his thumb scrolling endlessly. He was hiding, building a digital wall to avoid the wreckage he'd just created. There was no apology, not even a sideways glance of regret, just a defiant stillness, as if he was waiting for me to break first, to give him an opening to justify himself. I gave him nothing. I just drove my hands gripping the leather steering wheel. Streetlights painted fleeting stripes of light across my face. In those flashes, I kept seeing Sarah, my late wife. I saw her smile when I told her I was selling the company. "You've worked enough, Jack," she had whispered from her hospital bed. "Now it's time to live. Live for me, too. And take care of our boy. Our boy." I glanced over at the young man beside me. Where had that boy gone? The one who used to follow me around my workshop, his eyes wide with wonder as I turned raw wood into something useful. The boy who said he wanted to be just like me when he grew up. That memory now felt like a shard of glass in my mind. Had I spoiled him after Sarah died? Had I tried to fill the void she left with money and things, trying to buy my way out of a father's grief and guilt? The questions churned in my gut. Leo's cruel words at the restaurant, they weren't entirely wrong. I had run away. Not from work, but from a life without my wife. I thought that by pouring all my resources into Leo, I was honoring my promise to Sarah. But maybe I had just been turning him into a reflection of my own emptiness. We pulled up to his building, a sleek tower of glass and steel with a 24-hour doorman and a rooftop pool. A home I paid for month after month without question. "I can get up myself," Leo muttered, his hand already on the door handle. I didn't reply. I just watched him walk into the gleaming lobby without a single look back. I sat there in the quiet car for a long time after he disappeared. That night, my own house felt cavernous and cold. The silence was deafening. I walked into my home office, a room I rarely used, and just sat in an old leather armchair in the dark. Anger, hurt, disappointment, they swirled inside me like a storm. I could have broken something. I could have called Brenda and screamed at her. I could have called Leo and told him exactly how deep his words had cut. I did none of those things, because beneath the storm, something else was forming. Something cold, clear, and methodical. My silence at the restaurant wasn't weakness. My silence in the car wasn't defeat. It was the beginning of an audit. I stood up and switched on the desk lamp. A warm yellow light fell across the oak surface. I opened my old laptop, The fan whirred to life, the only sound in the room. The screen flickered on, showing my desktop background, the last photo ever taken of Sarah and me smiling on a beach. I looked into her eyes, and I knew what I had to do. I didn't open a social media app. I didn't open my email to write a long, emotional letter. I opened a spreadsheet program. A blank grid. Impersonal. Logical. Inescapable. I moved the cursor to the first cell A1. I took a deep breath and I started to type. The first line read, "Financial support for Leo Callahan last 5 years." The cursor blinked at the end of the sentence, a steady rhythmic pulse, waiting for the numbers, waiting for the truth. The audit had begun. The hours that followed were a blur of digital archaeology. I dove into the archives of my online banking, into folders of scanned receipts and dusty email confirmations I hadn't looked at in years. Each click of the mouse was like shoveling away a layer of dirt, uncovering a history I had paid for, but never truly examined. The blank spreadsheet waited patiently. I started with the easy part, college. I typed university tuition and fees into the first row. I pulled up the statements from the bursar's office. Freshman year, sophomore year, the first semester of his junior year, before he'd decided he was too brilliant for a formal education. The numbers materialized on the screen, stark and black. I remembered writing those checks, feeling a surge of pride. My son, the first Callahan to go to a 4-year university. Sarah would have been so proud. I had imagined him graduating, tossing his cap in the air, the world at his feet. Instead, he'd just stopped. He'd called me full of excitement about some online guru who said college was a scam, and I had just let it go. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to be the demanding father I never had. So I just paid the final bill and wished him luck. The number on the screen was just over $150,000. I stared at it for a moment, a ghost of an education. Next, I created a new row, apartment rental, downtown. I found the lease agreement I had co-signed. $4,500 a month, for 2.5 years. I did the math. My fingers felt heavy on the keyboard as I typed in the total. $135,000. I remembered the day Leo picked it out. "It's got a great view, Dad," he'd said, "and it's close to everything. It's the kind of place where you can network." I'd bought into it. I'd pictured him hosting sophisticated gatherings with other bright young entrepreneurs. In reality, I knew he was just hosting parties. But I paid. Every month on time. It was easier than arguing. It was easier than admitting my son might not be the prodigy I wanted him to be. Then came the car. A sleek black sports coupe. I found the bill of sale. $72,000. I'd bought it for him as a graduation present, an incentive to finish that final year. When he dropped out, I should have taken it back. But he'd been so crestfallen. Dad having a nice car is part of the image, he'd argued. You have to look successful to be successful. Another line he'd probably picked up from some podcast. And like a fool, I'd nodded. I paid for the car. I paid for the insurance, a staggering $600 a month, because of his age and the power of the engine. I added it all up. The car, the insurance for 2 years. Over $86,000. For an image. The night wore on. I poured myself a glass of water, the only thing I could stomach. The spreadsheet grew line by agonizing line. Health insurance, phone bills, utilities. Each one was a testament to my passive generosity. But the worst was yet to come. I opened the statements for the supplementary credit card I'd given him. For emergencies, I had told him. For emergencies, he had agreed. I started scrolling through the charges, a 5-year history of his life paid for by me. It was a litany of indulgence. Dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of where the entrees cost more than my weekly groceries. Hundreds of dollars at a time at exclusive clothing stores. charges from bars with names like Velvet and Elixir at 2 in the morning, and the travel. A weekend trip to Miami, a ski trip to Aspen with friends, a spontaneous flight to Las Vegas. These weren't emergencies. This was a lifestyle I was funding while telling myself I was just being a supportive father. I felt a wave of nausea. The blindness wasn't his. It was mine. I had been so desperate to give him everything I never had, so terrified of the silence in the house after Sarah was gone that I had refused to see the truth. I wasn't supporting his dream. I was subsidizing his delusion. My fingers flew across the keyboard, now fueled by a cold, hard anger. I categorized everything: restaurants, bars, clothing, travel, miscellaneous luxuries. I worked for hours, the only sound in the house the clicking of the keys and the low hum of the computer. The sun was beginning to tint the eastern sky a pale gray when I was finally done. I had 5 years of data. 5 years of my son's life quantified in dollars and cents. I scrolled to the bottom of the spreadsheet. Every row was filled. Every column had a subtotal. I took a breath. I moved the cursor to the final empty cell at the very bottom. The grand total. I typed in the formula. Equal sign. Sum. Open parenthesis. I highlighted all the subtotals. Close parenthesis. My finger hovered over the enter key. This was it. The price of my willful ignorance. The cost of avoiding conflict. The number that would change everything. I pressed enter. The number that appeared on the screen made the air leave my lungs. It shimmered in the low light of the desk lamp, a constellation of digits and commas that seemed utterly impossible. I checked the formula. I checked the subtotals. There was no mistake. For 5 years, I had given my son a life of complete, unadulterated ease, never asking for anything in return except for a respect he couldn't even be bothered to fake. The total was $492,754, almost $500,000. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the silent room. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. All that remained was a profound, chilling clarity. His words from the restaurant echoed in my head. You're a loser. Maybe he was right. I had lost. I had lost my son to a sense of entitlement I had personally financed. I had lost sight of the line between helping and enabling. I had lost my own self-respect by allowing myself to be treated like an ATM machine. But as I looked at that number on the screen, I didn't feel defeated. I felt awake. The audit wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming the truth. The numbers didn't lie. And from this moment on, neither would I. I saved the file. I named it the ledger. And then as the sun finally rose, I started making a new list. Not of what I had spent, but of what I was about to do. With the grand total burning a hole in my screen, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The number was obscene, but it was also the truth. It was the foundation I would build my next steps upon. But as I sat there watching the sky outside my window soften from black to a bruised purple, a small persistent thought began to itch at the back of my mind. The spending was reckless, yes. It was thoughtless. But was it all of it? Most of the charges were what you'd expect from a young man with no financial discipline: overpriced dinners, designer clothes, last-minute flights. But was there a pattern I was missing? Driven by this new unease, I went back into the credit card statements. This time, instead of just adding up the numbers, I sorted the entire 5-year history by the name of the payee. It was a long list, a digital trail of my son's whims. I scrolled past to the familiar names of airlines and hotel chains of tech stores and luxury brands. And then I saw it. At first, it was just one transaction among thousands. A payment for $2,000. The recipient was a company I'd never heard of, B&T Holdings LLC. It sounded so corporate, so bland. It didn't fit with the rest of Leo's spending. It wasn't a trendy restaurant or a flashy store. It was just a holding company. Curiosity piqued, I used the search function. I typed in the name, and my heart began to beat a little faster. It wasn't a one-time charge. It was there again the next month, and the month after that, and the month after that, for 48 consecutive months. $2,000 wired from his credit card to this anonymous company every single month like clockwork. $96,000 in total. What was it for? What services was this company providing to my unemployed wannabe entrepreneur son? It felt wrong, out of place. A steady, disciplined payment in a sea of chaotic impulse buys. It was the one piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. My hands felt cold as I opened a new browser tab. The rest of the world was starting to wake up, but in my office it felt like time had stopped. I typed the letters into the search bar. BT Holdings, LLC. I added the name of our state and hit enter. The first few results were generic business directories offering little information. I felt a flicker of frustration. But then I saw it. A link to the official Secretary of State Business Registry. My pulse quickened. This was official. This was real. I clicked the link. The page loaded with agonizing slowness, each second stretching out. Finally, the information appeared on the screen. The company was listed as a domestic limited liability company. I scanned the details. Date of formation, April 12th, 4.5 years ago. Just 6 months after my divorce from Brenda was finalized. My stomach tightened. The address listed was just a P.O. box downtown. It was a ghost company, a shell. My eyes moved down the page past the legal jargon, searching for the one thing that mattered. The names. Who was behind this? Who were the registered agents, the principals of this company that had been quietly siphoning money from my account for 4 years? I scrolled down to the section titled Managing Partners. My breath caught in my throat. There were 2 names listed. The first one I read was Brenda Callahan, my ex-wife. For a moment, I couldn't process it. Why would Brenda be taking money from Leo? It made no sense. And then my eyes fell to the second name listed right below hers, the name of the other managing partner, Todd Sterling. The room went cold. The spreadsheet on the other screen, with its shocking total of nearly $500,000, suddenly seemed insignificant. That number represented a story of a father's weakness and a son's entitlement. It was a family drama. But this was different. This wasn't a drama. This was a conspiracy. This was a calculated long-term plan to defraud me using my own son as the pipeline. The consistent $2,000 payments weren't for some mysterious service. It was a secret allowance, a kickback, a quiet little income stream for Brenda and her new husband, funded by my misplaced generosity and laundered through our son's credit card. They weren't just watching him squander my money. They were actively taking their own cut. The smug look on Todd's face at the restaurant flashed in my mind. The way Brenda said nothing. It wasn't just apathy. It was complicity. I had walked into that dinner thinking my son was the problem. I now realized he was just a symptom of a much deeper, much uglier disease. I didn't go to bed. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. As the sun cast long, early morning shadows across my lawn, I made a pot of coffee, black and strong. The bitter taste helped sharpen my focus. The emotional storm of the night had passed, and in its place was a landscape of cold, hard clarity. There was no more room for doubt or self-pity. There was only the plan. And the first step of that plan required a professional. I didn't look for a family counselor or a mediator. I needed a weapon. A few years back, a business acquaintance had mentioned a lawyer he'd used in a contentious contract dispute. He'd described her as a shark, a woman who didn't waste time with pleasantries, and whose only interest was in winning. Her name was Angela Rossi. At the time, I'd made a mental note to never get on her bad side. Now I was about to put her on my side. I found her firm online, a boutique law office with a sleek minimalist website that projected quiet confidence and expensive retainers. I dialed the number before I could second-guess myself. A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. Law offices of Angela Rossi. My name is Jack Callahan. I said, my own voice sounding steady, unfamiliar. I need to schedule a meeting with Ms. Rossi. It's a financial matter concerning my son and my ex-wife. The assistant was polite but firm. Ms. Rossi is fully booked for the next 2 weeks, sir. I can schedule you for the old Jack would have accepted that. He would have thanked her and waited patiently for 2 weeks, letting the situation fester. But the old Jack wasn't home anymore. I understand she's busy, I interrupted, but kept my tone even. Please tell her it involves the potential misappropriation of funds from a family trust and a shell corporation named B&T Holdings. There was a pause on the other end of the line. The professional crispness in the assistant's voice wavered. 1 moment, please. I was on hold for less than 30 seconds. The next voice I heard was different. It was sharp, clear, and carried an unmistakable edge of authority. There was no introduction. This is Angela Rossi. You have my attention. How soon can you be at my office? I looked at the spreadsheet still glowing on my laptop screen. The ledger of my own foolishness now transformed into a tool of action. I'm on my way, I said, and hung up the phone. Angela Rossi's office was on the 35th floor of a glass and steel tower that pierced the city skyline. It wasn't the kind of law office with dark wood paneling and leather-bound books. It was a space of stark, calculated minimalism. The walls were white. The furniture was a collection of sharp, modern angles, and one entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window offering a breathtaking, godlike view of the city below. The message was clear. This was a place where problems were not coddled. They were dissected with surgical precision from a very high altitude. Angela Rossi herself was a reflection of her office. She was younger than I expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back into a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She didn't offer me coffee or condolences. She gestured to a chair opposite her enormous glass desk, which was almost completely bare except for a laptop and a single pristine legal pad. Mr. Callahan, please sit. Her voice was like the clink of ice in a glass. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, I began. She cut me off not rudely, but with an efficiency that bordered on terrifying. Your message was compelling. Time is money. Let's not waste either. What have you got? Didn't start with the story of the disastrous dinner. I didn't talk about my feelings of betrayal or disappointment. I had done enough of that in the long dark hours of the night. I simply opened my laptop, turned it to face her, and opened the spreadsheet I had named the ledger. I said nothing. I let the numbers speak for themselves. She leaned forward, her eyes scanning the columns. She scrolled down, her expression unchanging. She took in the tuition, the rent, the car, the endless credit card charges. When she reached the bottom at the grand total of nearly $500,000, her eyebrows raised just a fraction of a millimeter. It was the only sign of emotion she showed. She then scrolled back up and looked at the line item for B&T Holdings. Explain this, she commanded. I told her. I laid out the discovery of the Shell Corporation, the names on the registry, the 4 years of systematic $2,000 payments. I handed her a printout of the company's registration details. She examined it for a long moment, holding the paper by its edges as if it were evidence at a crime scene, which I suppose it was. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. The appraisal was intense, like an X-ray of my resolve. All right, Mr. Callahan, she said, her tone all business. Let's break this down into 2 separate issues because legally, that's what they are. Issue 1 is your son. Issue 2 is your ex-wife and her husband. She steepled her fingers. First, your son. I want you to be very clear on this. The money you have given him, the tuition, the rent money, the cash for his expenses, that is all gone. Legally, those are considered gifts. You gave them freely without a written contract for repayment. There is no legal path to claw that money back. We would spend a fortune in court only to lose. Attempting to do so would make you look vindictive and foolish. So we are going to write off that $500,000 as a very expensive and very painful life lesson. Do you understand? I nodded. I'm not here for the money I've already lost. I'm here for what happens next. A flicker of something that might have been respect appeared in her eyes before vanishing. Good, she said. Because what happens next is where we have all the power. The gifts are in the past, but the assets he is currently using are not gifts. They are privileges. Privileges that are entirely within your control. The apartment is leased in your name. The car is titled in your name. The credit card is your account. You are not legally obligated to continue providing any of it. Ending these arrangements is not an act of revenge. It is you, the legal owner and account holder, simply choosing to end a service. It is clean, it is quick, and it is entirely defensible. She paused, letting that sink in. Now for issue number 2, she continued, her voice becoming even sharper. Your ex-wife and Mr. Sterling. This is a different matter entirely. This is not a family squabble. This is potentially a coordinated scheme to defraud. They used your son's supplementary credit card, an account intended for his support, to funnel money directly to themselves through a shell corporation. We can argue that this constitutes a misappropriation of funds. It's a serious breach of trust. We can't promise a criminal case, but the threat of a civil suit, of depositions, of having their finances and this dirty little scheme exposed in a legal discovery process, that is a cannon aimed directly at their comfortable life. It's our leverage. It's the tool we will use to ensure they never bother you again. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, replaced by a cold sense of purpose. So what's the plan, I asked? Angela spun her laptop around and started typing. A calendar appeared on the screen. The plan is not one single action. It's a sequence, a controlled demolition. We will dismantle his support structure piece by piece in a way that maximizes psychological impact and minimizes his ability to react. We don't want one big explosion. We want a series of small, contained shocks that will force him to confront the reality of his situation without any of his usual safety nets. She pointed to the screen. This is how it's going to work. Day by day. We begin this coming Monday. No warnings, no emotional phone calls, just action. Monday, she said, her voice like a drumbeat. We start with the car. It's his status symbol, his freedom. At 9 a.m., you will call a repossession company. Since the title is in your name, it's perfectly legal. You will tell them where he parks. By noon, his car will be gone. The first shock, he will call you confused and angry. You will give him a simple, calm, and unarguable answer. I needed the car back. Tuesday, she continued, moving her finger to the next day. The apartment. While he is reeling from the loss of his car, you will go to the leasing office of his building. You are the sole lessee on the agreement. You will submit a 30-day notice to vacate, a legal formal process. The building will then send him an official notification. The second shock. The ground beneath his feet will begin to feel unsteady. Wednesday. The money. You will call your credit card company and report the supplementary card as lost. They will immediately deactivate it and issue a new one to you and you alone. The next time he tries to buy a coffee or pay for dinner, he will face the public humiliation of being declined. The third and final shock in the sequence. By Wednesday evening, he will be without transportation, without a home in 30 days, and without access to any of your money. She looked at me, her gaze intense. He will be completely isolated. He will run to his mother and Todd for help. And that is when we make our final move. She clicked on Friday. On Friday afternoon, my office will send a formal, legally worded letter via courier and email to Brenda and Todd at both their home and their offices. The letter will not be aggressive. It will be polite. It will simply state that we are conducting a review of your financial support for your son and have discovered certain irregularities regarding payments to a company called B&T Holdings LLC, in which they are listed as managing partners. The letter will request a meeting to discuss a full and amicable settlement to avoid potential civil litigation. It will be professional, quiet, and absolutely terrifying for them. She leaned back. And that's the plan. By the end of this week, your son's world will have been turned upside down and your ex-wife will be in a state of panic. You will have said almost nothing. You will have simply taken back what is yours. Any questions? I looked at the day-by-day plan laid out on her screen. It was ruthless. It was brilliant. It was exactly what I needed. No questions, I said. Let's get to work. Monday morning arrived with a cool gray light that filtered through my kitchen window. I sat at the table with a mug of black coffee. The plan Angela Rossi had laid out feeling less like a legal strategy and more like a pre-flight checklist. There was a strange lack of emotion inside me. No anger, no sadness, just a quiet hum of purpose. The weekend had been a long, silent vigil, a final period of mourning for the relationship I thought I had with my son. Now the mourning was over. It was time for the work to begin. At precisely 9 a.m., I picked up my phone. I didn't hesitate. I had already looked up the name of a reputable vehicle recovery service that operated 24 hours a day. I dialed the number. A man with a tired, gravelly voice answered. Citywide Recovery. How can I help? Hello, I said, my voice steady and clear. My name is Jack Callahan. I need to arrange for a vehicle repossession. There was the sound of typing on the other end. Okay, Mr. Callahan. Is the vehicle title in your name? Yes, it is, I confirmed. I am the sole owner. And the reason for the recovery, I repeated the words Angela had given me, a legal shield against any emotional argument. The authorized user of the vehicle is in violation of our verbal agreement for its use. The man didn't ask for details. It was clear he didn't care. This was just another job for him. Understood. I'll need the make, model, and color of the vehicle, the license plate number, and the address where it's typically parked. I gave him all of it without a flicker of emotion. The make and model of the sleek black sports coupe, the license plate number I had memorized from the insurance documents, and the exact location in the residence garage of Leo's apartment building. I knew the spot number. I had paid for the reserved space after all. We have a truck in that area now, the man said after a moment. We can have it secured within the hour. We'll contact you once the vehicle is in our possession. Thank you, I said. We'll need a credit card for the service fee, sir. I gave him the number from my own card, not the one Leo had been using. The transaction was approved in seconds. The man confirmed the details one last time, and then the call was over. I placed the phone back on the table. It was done. The first domino had been tipped. I stared out the window, but I wasn't seeing my own backyard. I was seeing the day I gave Leo that car. The look of sheer, unadulterated joy on his face. He'd thrown his arms around me the first time he'd done that in years. I won't let you down, Dad, he had promised. I had believed him. I had handed him the keys to a $72,000 symbol of my hope, and he had driven it straight into the ground. There was no satisfaction in what I had just done. No thrill of revenge. It felt more like a necessary amputation. I was cutting away the diseased part, not to punish, but to save what was left. I took another sip of my coffee. It had gone cold. Now all I had to do was wait for the sound of the first piece falling. I knew it wouldn't be long. The call came an hour and 12 minutes after I'd hung up with the recovery service. I had just finished washing my coffee mug and was drying it when my phone buzzed on the granite countertop. Leo's face, a smiling picture from a happier time, flashed on the screen. I let it buzz a second time before answering a small but significant shift in our dynamic. I had always picked up on the first ring for him. I took a breath, pressed the green icon, and held the phone to my ear. I said nothing. "Dad, Dad, are you there?" His voice was high-pitched, laced with an unfamiliar thread of panic. "I'm here, Leo," I said. My voice was quiet even. "My car's gone. I went down to the garage and it's just gone. I called the police. They think it was stolen. Can you believe it? Right out of a secure garage." He was talking fast, the words tumbling over each other in a rush of adrenaline and disbelief. I listened to him without interruption. I let the silence hang in the air for a beat after he finished. "It wasn't stolen, Leo," I said. There was a pause on his end. I could almost hear the gears in his head shifting from panic to confusion. What? What do you mean it wasn't stolen? The car is gone, Dad. It's not there." "I know," I said. "What do you mean you know?" he demanded, his voice rising again. "How could you possibly know this was the moment, the pivot point?" Angela Rossi's voice echoed in my mind. Simple, calm, unarguable. Because I had it picked up, I said, my tone as flat and factual as if I were discussing the weather. The silence that followed was profound. It stretched for 5 full seconds. I could picture him perfectly standing in that concrete garage, his phone pressed to his ear, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. The world he had known, a world that bent to his every whim, had just tilted on its axis. "You..." "What?" he finally stammered. The words were barely a whisper. "You had it picked up. What are you talking about?" "Why would you do that? I needed the car back," I said, using the exact phrase Angela had provided. It was perfect in its simplicity. It was a reason that was not a reason. It offered no room for argument, because it was based on my needs, not his. For the first time, my needs were the priority. "You needed the car back," he repeated, his voice now filled with incredulous anger. "It's my car. You bought it for me. You can't just..." "Take it. I have things to do today. I have a meeting." "It's not your car, Leo," I corrected him gently, but with a firmness he had never heard from me before. "The title is in my name. The insurance is in my name. It has always been my car. I have simply been allowing you to use it." "This is insane," he shouted, and I had to pull the phone slightly away from my ear. "Is this about the other night? Is this because of what I said at dinner? You're going to steal my car because your feelings got hurt. How childish is that?" I did not take the bait. I did not defend my feelings or engage with his accusation. I remained a calm, immovable object. "I have to go, Leo. I have things to do today as well." "No, don't you hang up on me," he yelled. "Where is my car? I need it." "The car is safe," I said, "but it is no longer available for your use. I suggest you look into the bus schedule." And with that, before he could respond, before he could escalate his tantrum, I ended the call. I placed the phone back on the counter, my hand perfectly steady. The silence of my kitchen rushed back in to fill the void. There was no sense of victory, no joy. Just the quiet, grim satisfaction of a necessary first step completed. He thought this was about my hurt feelings. He had no idea this was about his future. He was still playing checkers. I, with Angela Rossi's help, was playing chess, and I had just removed his queen from the board. An hour later, my phone pinged with a new message. It wasn't a call or a text from Leo. It was an email from Citywide Recovery. The subject line was simple: job completed. Attached was a single low-resolution photograph. I opened it. The photo was grainy, taken under the harsh fluorescent lights of the underground garage. It showed the sleek black sports coupe my son's pride and joy hooked up to the rugged, greasy tow truck. The car looked small and helpless, its aggressive styling rendered pathetic. It looked like a captured animal, its power completely nullified, ready to be dragged away into the darkness. My mind didn't see the tow truck. For a fleeting second, it saw the showroom. I remembered the day I bought it, the gleaming chrome and the intoxicating smell of new leather. I remembered the look of pure, unadulterated joy on Leo's face when I surprised him with it. It was more than just a car. It was a statement. It was my way of saying, I believe in you. I know you've left school, but I believe you're going to do great things. It was a $72,000 piece of my faith in him, a physical manifestation of my hope. He had thrown his arms around me that day, a genuine, heartfelt hug, the kind I hadn't received in years. I won't let you down, Dad. He had promised, his voice thick with emotion. A promise that had evaporated in a cloud of overpriced dinners and thoughtless expenditures. A promise that had been rendered meaningless by the cold, hard numbers on my spreadsheet. The man who bought that car was a hopeful fool, a father who thought he could buy his son's ambition. That man was gone, replaced by the one sitting here now staring at a grainy photo of the consequence. There was a dull ache in my chest, a quiet grief, not for the car, but for the hope it had once represented. It was the regret of a surgeon who has to cut away something that was once healthy. But I knew with an unshakable certainty that the procedure was necessary. I swiped the photo away, returning my phone's screen to black. The first step was complete. I hadn't stolen his car. I hadn't acted out of spite. I had simply repossessed a dream that had gone bad. The foundation of his artificial world now had its first significant crack, and I was the one holding the hammer. The next morning I drove downtown. Tuesday. Step 2. Leo hadn't called or texted again since our brief explosive conversation the day before. I imagined he was spending his time fuming, complaining to his friends, and trying to figure out his next move, completely oblivious to the fact that I was already 2 steps ahead of him. His world was shrinking, and he didn't even know it yet. I walked into the management office of his apartment building. It was a sleek, modern space, all chrome and frosted glass, designed to feel exclusive and expensive. A young woman with an impeccably professional smile sat behind a large curved desk. "Good morning, how can I help you?" she asked. "Good morning," I replied, my voice calm. "My name is Jack Callahan. I'm the lessee for apartment 42B. She typed my name into her computer, her smile never wavering. "Yes, Mr. Callahan. How can we assist you today?" "Is there a maintenance issue?" "No, everything is fine," I said. "I'm here to submit my 30-day notice to vacate the premises." The professional smile flickered for just a second. It was a tiny crack in her polished facade, a brief moment of surprise. Residents in a building like this didn't usually leave so abruptly. They renewed their expensive leases year after year. "Oh," she said. "Of course. I'll just need to see your ID, and I have a form for you to fill out." I slid my driver's license across the desk and took the pen and form she offered. It was a standard document full of legal jargon. I had brought my copy of the original lease agreement with me just in case there were any questions, but it wasn't necessary. Her system clearly showed that I, and I alone, was the financially responsible party for the unit. My son's name was listed only as a resident occupant, a guest with no legal standing. I filled out the form with steady, precise letters. Current date, apartment number, forwarding address my own. I signed my name at the bottom, the ink a definitive black line on the white paper. I slid the completed form and the pen back across the desk to her. She took it, her professionalism fully restored. She typed the information from the form into her computer, the clicks of her keyboard the only sound in the quiet office. "All right, Mr. Callahan, everything is in order," she said, her voice neutral. "The lease will be officially terminated in 30 days. An official notice will be emailed to all registered occupants of the unit this afternoon, outlining the move-out procedures." All registered occupants. That meant Leo. He wasn't going to get a furious call from his father. He was going to get a cold, impersonal email from a corporate entity. A formal notice that his home, the luxurious backdrop for his carefree life, had an expiration date. "Thank you for your help," I said, standing up. "You're welcome, Mr. Callahan. Have a good day." I walked out of the office and back into the bright morning sun. I didn't look up at the towering glass building at the window of the apartment on the 42nd floor. I didn't need to. I had just turned his gilded cage into a ticking clock. The second piece had fallen, and I knew the third was only a day away. The call I was expecting came late that afternoon. I had spent the day methodically going through old files in my office, a mundane task that kept my hands busy and my mind focused. I was sorting through a box of old blueprints when my phone, which I had placed on the corner of my desk, began to vibrate. I saw Leo's name on the screen. I calmly put down the blueprint I was holding, wiped a smudge of dust from my fingers, and answered on the third vibration. "Hello, Leo." "Don't you hello Leo me," he roared. The voice on the other end was not the panicked, confused sound from the day before. This was something else entirely. This was the sound of pure, unrestrained rage. It was raw cracking with a fury that bordered on hysteria. "An email. You send me an email, an eviction notice. Are you out of your mind?" It was from the building management, Leo, not from me. I said, my voice deliberately soft, a counterpoint to his volcanic eruption. "It's standard procedure." "Standard procedure?" He shrieked, his voice so loud I could hear it distorting through the phone's small speaker. "There is nothing standard about this. You're throwing me out on the street. First my car, now my home. What's next? Are you going to cancel my health insurance? Are you trying to kill me?" "Nobody is trying to kill you," I said, keeping my tone level. "And you are not being thrown out on the street. You have 30 days as per the terms of the lease agreement. A lease agreement that is in my name." "I can't believe this," he raged on, ignoring my logic completely. "I cannot believe you are doing this. I talked to Mom. She said you've lost it. She said this is exactly the kind of cold-hearted, vindictive thing she would expect from you. This is why she left you. You know that. Because you're incapable of feeling anything." He was trying to wound me using his mother's words as a weapon. The old Jack would have flinched. He would have felt a sting of pain, a need to defend himself, to argue that he wasn't cold, that he had loved her, that he loved him. But the old Jack wasn't here. The old Jack was buried under a spreadsheet of receipts and a mountain of broken promises. "Brenda is entitled to her opinion," I said calmly. "But this doesn't concern her. This is between you and me. It concerns her when her son is about to be made homeless by his own lunatic father," he screamed. "Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? My whole life is in that apartment. My work, my computer. Everything I need for my business. Your business." I repeated the words slowly, letting them hang in the air. This was the opening Angela and I had discussed, the moment to reframe the entire conversation. "That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about." My shift in tone seemed to throw him off. His angry tirade paused, replaced by a suspicious silence. "What about my business?" he asked, his voice wary. "You're a businessman now, Leo," I said. "You're the CEO of Momentum Digital. You told me yourself that a formal education was holding you back, that you were ready to make your own way in the world. I admire that ambition. I truly do." "What's your point?" he snapped, but the fire in his voice had diminished slightly, replaced by confusion. "My point is that businesses have expenses. Overhead. Rent is an overhead. Transportation is an overhead. Successful businessmen don't have their fathers pay their overhead for them. It undermines their credibility. It makes them look like a hobby, not a serious venture." "So what?" he said. "You're just going to cut me off after supporting me all this time?" "I am not cutting you off, Leo," I said, and my voice was firm but not unkind. "I am letting you go. I am giving you the opportunity to truly be the man you say you want to be. You're 24 years old. You have an idea you believe in. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet." The argument was a brick wall of logic he couldn't break through. He couldn't dispute his age. He couldn't deny his own stated ambitions. I had taken his own words, his own justifications for his lifestyle, and turned them into the very reason that lifestyle had to end. He was trapped by his own narrative. All the fury seemed to drain out of him at once, replaced by a raw, desperate panic. "I can't," he whispered, the fight gone from his voice. "Dad, I can't. I don't have any money. I'll be homeless. You can't do this to me. Please." It was the plea I had been expecting. The final desperate attempt to pull me back into the role of the soft-hearted rescuer. "You have 30 days to figure it out," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the ache in my own heart. "You're smart, and you are capable. I have faith in you." And then, just as Angela had instructed, I ended the call. I didn't give him a chance to plead further, to cry, or to scream. The conversation was over because I had decided it was over. I placed the phone face down on my desk. The silence that followed was heavy. The second shock had been delivered. He was now a bird in a cage, watching the door swing open, terrified of the flight he had always claimed he wanted to take. Wednesday morning felt different. The first 2 steps had been about taking back physical assets, a car, an apartment. This next step felt more fundamental. It was about cutting off the fuel line, the endless, invisible stream of money that had powered my son's life of consequence-free consumption. It was time to close the account. I found the number on the back of my own credit card and dialed. After navigating a brief automated menu, a cheerful customer service representative answered. "Thank you for calling Platinum Services. My name is Maria. How can I help you today?" "Hello, Maria," I said. "My name is Jack Callahan. I need to report a supplementary card on my account as lost. I can certainly help with that." "Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice filled with practiced empathy, "can you please confirm the name on the supplementary card?" "Leo Callahan," I replied. I could hear the soft clicking of her keyboard. "Okay, I see that right here. For security purposes, can you please verify your date of birth and the last 4 digits of your social security number?" I provided the information. It was a familiar ritual, but today it felt different. I wasn't just verifying my identity, I was asserting my authority over the account, an authority I had neglected for far too long. "Thank you for that, Mr. Callahan." "Everything matches," she said brightly. "I have now placed a permanent deactivation on the supplementary card ending in 18842. It can no longer be used for any transactions. We will issue a new supplementary card with a different number, which you should receive in 5 to 7 business days." "That won't be necessary," I said. "Please do not issue a replacement. I want the supplementary card holder removed from my account entirely." There was a brief pause. "Oh. Yes, of course, sir. I can do that for you right now. Just to confirm, you are removing Leo Callahan's access to this account effective immediately." "That is correct," I said. More clicking. "All right, sir. It's done. The supplementary card is deactivated and the user has been removed. Is there anything else I can assist you with today?" "No, Maria," I said. "That's all." The call was over in less than 3 minutes. It was a simple, sterile administrative task. With a few words, I had severed the financial lifeline that had kept him afloat. The next time he reached for that piece of plastic, that symbol of his unlimited access and consequence-free existence, he would find it was just a useless piece of plastic. The third shock was now armed and waiting. All it needed was for him to try and buy something. And I had no doubt that moment was coming very soon. I didn't witness what happened on Wednesday evening, but I pieced it together later. It was the predictable, inevitable conclusion to the sequence of events I had set in motion. It was the final public demolition of the illusion my son had been living in. Leo, still reeling from the loss of his car and home but not yet understanding the full scope of his predicament, decided to double down on his fantasy. He had a meeting scheduled with a potential client, a graphic designer he was trying to convince to join his non-existent company on the promise of future profits. To project the image of success he so desperately craved, He chose a restaurant in the city's trendiest district, a place where the cocktails had smoke and the entrees were arranged like modern art. I can picture him perfectly. He would have been wearing his most expensive clothes, the ones my credit card had paid for. He would have been leaning back in his chair, speaking with a casual, confident air, throwing around the buzzwords he had memorized. He would have talked about synergy and disruption, painting a grand vision of a digital marketing empire he was on the verge of creating. He was selling a dream not just to the designer, but to himself. For the price of an expensive meal, he could sit in that beautifully designed room and pretend he was the man he saw in his daydreams, powerful, respected, a self-made success. The designer, a young woman trying to make her way in a competitive field, was likely captivated or at least intrigued. Leo could be charming when he was performing. The meal would have gone well. The food was exquisite, the wine perfectly chilled. As it drew to a close, Leo, full of false confidence and expensive wine, would have made a grand gesture. "This is on me," of course, he would have said, waving away any attempt by the designer to split the bill. An investment in a future partnership. He would have signaled for the waiter with a confident flick of his wrist, the way he had seen Todd do it. The bill would have arrived, a significant three-figure sum, presented discreetly in a small leather folder. Leo wouldn't have even flinched at the total. Why would he? That number was just an abstraction to him, a problem for someone else to solve. He would have taken out the platinum supplementary card, the one with my name on it, in small letters beneath his own, and placed it in the folder with a flourish. He would have handed it to the waiter with a magnanimous smile. He was in his element, the benevolent CEO closing a deal. The waiter would have returned a few minutes later, a polite but strained expression on his face. He would have leaned in and spoken in a low voice, a voice intended not to be overheard, but in the sudden quiet of Leo's confidence, it would have been as loud as a gunshot. "I'm very sorry, sir, but the card has been declined." The blood would have drained from Leo's face. Disbelief would have been the first reaction. It was impossible. A mistake. "Run it again," he would have said, his voice a little too sharp. "There must be an issue with your machine." The waiter, ever professional, would have nodded and walked away. Leo would have tried to cover his mounting panic with a forced laugh, making a small joke to the designer about the unreliability of technology. But the seed of dread had been planted. The seconds would have ticked by like hours. The waiter returned, his expression now one of finality. "I apologize, sir. I've run it again. It's been declined. The message says to contact the card issuer." The humiliation would have been absolute. Public. Undeniable. The designer would be looking at him now with a new expression, a mixture of pity and dawning realization. The successful entrepreneur was a fraud. He had no other card. I had made sure of that. He probably had less than $20 in cash in his wallet. He had no car to offer as collateral. He had nothing. His entire identity, the carefully constructed facade of Momentum Digital and its visionary CEO, had been shattered by a small electronic transaction failing to complete. He had to make the most shameful call of his life, not to me, not yet, but to a friend, begging them to come downtown and pay his restaurant bill so he wouldn't be arrested for theft of services. The designer would have made a polite but hasty excuse and left him there alone, sitting at a table littered with the remains of a meal he couldn't afford, a king dethroned in his own fantasy kingdom. The third shock had landed, and this one had left a scar. The final call of the day came just before midnight. I was sitting in my armchair in the dark, watching the distant lights of the city twinkle through the large living room window. When the phone rang, I didn't even have to look at the screen to know who it was. I answered and waited in the silence. This time there was no shouting, no rage, no accusations. The voice on the other end was almost unrecognizable. It was small, hollowed out, and laced with a tremor of pure, undiluted fear. It was the voice of a boy who had just seen a ghost. "Dad," he said, the word barely a whisper. "I'm here," I replied softly. "The card," he said, his voice cracking. "It didn't work." At dinner. It didn't work. He wasn't angry about it. He was just stating a fact so fundamentally impossible in his world that he could barely comprehend it. "I know," I said. "I don't understand." He continued, his breathing shallow. "My car is gone. They're kicking me out of my apartment. The card is... it's not working. Dad, what is happening?" The question was not a challenge. It was a genuine plea from a child lost in the woods. The bravado, the entitlement, the years of carefully constructed arrogance had been stripped away layer by layer until all that was left was this small, frightened voice. He had been so confident in the invincibility of his world that its sudden systematic collapse had left him utterly broken. I did not offer him an explanation. I did not offer him comfort. The time for that was over. This was the moment for the final, crucial lesson, the lesson of consequence. The world was not his playground, and I was no longer its willing groundskeeper. "We will talk soon, son," I said, my voice calm and measured, but carrying a weight he had never heard before. It was not a promise of rescue. It was a summons. And before he could ask another question, I ended the call, leaving him alone in the wreckage of his Wednesday evening, with nothing but my quiet, ominous words to haunt him through the long night ahead. The stage was now set for the final act. Thursday was a day of silence from my end. My phone did not ring. The plan was moving forward quietly and inexorably, but it was not a quiet day for my son. I learned later that having exhausted his options and finding himself completely adrift, he made his last, most desperate move. He took an Uber to the financial district, to the gleaming skyscraper where Todd Sterling built his empire. He went to see the man he had called a winner. I can only imagine the scene. Leo, without his car, without his confident swagger, would have looked like a wreck. His expensive clothes would have seemed like a costume that no longer fit. He would have walked into Todd's office, a corner suite on the 50th floor, a fortress of glass and steel with a panoramic view of the city. It was a room designed to intimidate, to make visitors feel small. The air would have smelled of expensive cologne and ambition. Todd would have been behind his massive mahogany desk, looking perfectly composed, a predator in his natural habitat. He would have looked up from his computer with a cool, unreadable expression, not the friendly, avuncular man from the restaurant. This was Todd, the businessman. Leo must have stumbled through his explanation. He would have recounted the humiliating litany of his week. The car vanishing, the eviction notice, the credit card being declined in front of a potential business partner. He was laying his entire pathetic situation bare at the feet of the man he admired. And then would have come the plea, the final desperate gamble. He would have asked for the $50,000 again, not as a confident entrepreneur seeking seed funding, but as a drowning man begging for a life raft. Todd would have listened to the entire story without interruption, his hands probably steepled in front of him, his face a mask of calm calculation. He would have let the desperate silence hang in the air after Leo finished. "That's quite a predicament, Leo," Todd would have said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "A real cash flow problem." "It's just temporary," Leo would have insisted, trying to salvage some shred of dignity. "Once the business gets going," Todd would have held up a hand, cutting him off. "Let me be clear so there are no more misunderstandings," he would have said, his voice turning from cool to ice cold. "I don't invest in passions. I invest in assets. And right now, Leo, you are not a good asset. You have no car, no home, no income, and no credit. You are, in the bluntest financial terms, a liability." The words would have been a slap in the face. This was the man Leo had championed, the man he had used to insult his own father. "But my mom," Leo would have stammered. "Brenda said you might be able to help." And that, I imagine, is when Todd decided to end the conversation, to cauterize the wound and sever the connection for good. He would have leaned forward, a look of bored finality in his eyes. "Let's talk about your mother," he would have said. And let's talk about those $2,000 payments you've been making every month to B&T Holdings. Leo would have been confused. What about the mom said that was for consulting, for the business plan? A cruel thin smile would have touched Todd's lips. Consulting kid, there is no business plan. There never was. Your father was throwing money away on you with no oversight. A fire hose of cash with no one directing it. That's just bad financial management. So Brenda and I provided that oversight. We set up a structure, a simple LLC, to manage a portion of that outflow. You can call it a management fee. An administrative expense for overseeing the bank of Dad. The words must have hit Leo like physical blows. He would have stared at Todd, his mind struggling to process the implications. It wasn't a loan. It wasn't an investment. It wasn't consulting. It was a scheme. A long, patient, calculated deception. You were taking my money, Leo would have whispered, the horror dawning. I wasn't taking your money, Todd would have corrected him, his voice laced with contempt. It was never your money to begin with. It was your father's, and you were squandering it. We were simply ensuring that some of it was put to better use. The full weight of the betrayal would have crashed down on Leo in that moment. It wasn't just about the money. That was almost secondary. This was his mother, his own mother, who had comforted him, who had agreed with him that his father was being unfair, had been a willing, active partner in a scheme to bleed his father dry, using him as the unwitting pipeline. The woman he had run to for sympathy was just another predator at the trough. Now, if you'll excuse me, Todd would have said, turning back to his computer, the dismissal absolute. I have actual business to attend to. The bank of Dad is officially closed, and so are we. Leo would have stumbled out of that office in a daze. He had walked in seeking a loan. He walked out having lost a mother. He was no longer just a spoiled young man who had been cut off. He was an orphan of his own delusions, completely and utterly alone in a world that was colder and harder than he had ever imagined. He didn't take another Uber. He walked. He stumbled out of the climate-controlled lobby of Todd's building and into the chaotic afternoon symphony of the city. Horns blared, people bustled past him, a river of humanity flowing around a rock of sudden paralyzing despair. He walked for blocks with no destination, his expensive shoes slapping meaninglessly against the hard pavement. The city he had always seen as his playground, a backdrop for his ambitions, now felt alien and hostile. He was invisible, a ghost, haunting a life that was no longer his. Eventually, his legs gave out. He found a small, forgotten park, a tiny patch of green, wedged between two towering skyscrapers. He collapsed onto a hard wooden bench, the kind meant for fleeting rests, not existential crises. He stared at his hands. They were soft, uncalloused. They were the hands of a man who had never done a day of real labor in his life. He looked at his clothes, the designer jeans, the Italian leather shoes. They felt like a costume for a play that had just ended, leaving him stranded on stage in front of an empty house. For the first time in his life, there was no one to call. Calling me was useless. I was the architect of this demolition. Calling his mother was now impossible, a betrayal so profound he couldn't even process it. Calling his friends would mean admitting the humiliating truth that his entire life had been a lie funded by a father he had openly mocked. He was an island, and the tide was rising. He thought of my words on the phone. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet. He had always considered it a cliché, something fathers said. Now it was a terrifyingly literal prospect. He looked down at his feet, at the expensive shoes covering them, and for the first time he wondered if they were strong enough to hold him up. The weight of it all finally broke him. Sitting on that public bench, surrounded by the indifferent city, Leo began to cry. Not the angry, frustrated tears of a spoiled child. These were the racking, gut-wrenching sobs of a man who had just lost everything. Most importantly, the comforting delusion of who he thought he was. He wasn't a visionary CEO. He wasn't a self-made man. He wasn't a winner. He was just a boy. A 24-year-old boy who had been used as a pawn by his mother, enabled by his father, and who now, for the first time, was completely and utterly alone with the consequences. The city noise faded into a dull roar, as his own quiet, desperate sorrow became the only sound in his universe. On Friday afternoon, just as the corporate world was beginning to wind down for the weekend, 2 identical emails were delivered. One arrived in the inbox of Brenda Callahan's personal account. The other arrived in the inbox of Todd Sterling, flagged as urgent by his executive assistant. They had likely spent the day feeling a sense of smug relief. Leo's problems were his own, a mess of his own making. They had successfully dodged the financial bullet. They were safe. The email from the law offices of Angela Rossi shattered that illusion into a million pieces. The email itself was a masterpiece of professional intimidation. It was not written on flashy letterhead, but the simple, elegant design exuded an aura of expensive, serious legal power. The subject line was deceptively innocuous. Regarding the financial support of Leo Callahan. It sounded administrative, almost boring, a simple matter of tidying up loose ends. The body of the email was polite, formal, and utterly chilling. It did not accuse. It did not threaten. It simply stated facts with the cold precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It began cordially introducing Angela Rossi as the legal representative for their mutual relation, Mr. Jack Callahan. It went on to state that in light of recent changes in his family support structure, Mr. Callahan was conducting a comprehensive review of all financial distributions made on behalf of his son Leo Callahan over the past 60 months. Then came the paragraph that would have made their blood run cold. It stated in dry legal language that their review had identified a series of regular significant payments made from the supplementary credit card account to a private limited liability company. It noted that a routine public records search had identified both Ms. Brenda Callahan and Mr. Todd Sterling as the registered managing partners of this entity. And then it named the company B&T Holdings LLC. Seeing that name in a formal legal document connected directly to them would have been like seeing a photograph of themselves at the scene of a crime. It was proof. The scheme they thought was so clever, so safely hidden, was now exposed, laid bare under the harsh, unflattering light of legal scrutiny. The final paragraph was the masterstroke. It was not a demand or a threat. It was a polite invitation. It stated that in the interest of resolving any potential misunderstandings or accounting irregularities in an amicable and private manner, they would like to schedule a meeting. The email suggested that such a meeting would be the most efficient way to achieve a full and final settlement and to avoid the time expense and public nature of any potential civil litigation that might otherwise be necessary to clarify the matter. The email ended with a simple professional closing, "We look forward to hearing from you at your earliest convenience to schedule this discussion." For Brenda and Todd, those words were not an invitation. They were a summons, a quiet, terrifying declaration that the game was over. The cannon Angela Rossi had spoken of had been wheeled into position, and it was aimed directly at the foundations of their comfortable, carefully constructed life. The email landed in their lives like a guided missile, and the explosion happened in the pristine white living room of their multi-million-dollar home. The silence in the room, usually a testament to their refined taste, and the quiet hum of wealth now felt like the dead air in a tomb. Brenda was pacing back and forth on a vast cream-colored rug, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. Her face was pale, her carefully constructed mask of serene satisfaction completely gone, replaced by a raw, naked fear. Todd sat on the white leather sofa, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was trying to project an aura of calm control, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the glass, and a small muscle twitched in his jaw. He had read the email 3 times as if hoping the words would change. How Brenda finally hissed, whirling to face him. How did he find out? This was supposed to be completely clean. You told me it was clean. Calm down, Brenda. Todd said, his voice a low growl. Hysterics won't solve anything. Calm down, she shot back, her voice rising. They know, Todd. They know about B&T Holdings. They put the name in a legal letter. This isn't some vague threat. This is a sniper's bullet. This is your fault. You got arrogant. Todd took a slow, deliberate sip of his whiskey. He looked at her, and the charming, successful man she had married was gone. In his place was a cornered animal. My fault, he sneered. Let's be clear. You were the one who was never satisfied. You were the one who felt Jack got off too easy in the divorce. This was your idea as much as mine. A little insurance policy, you called it. I didn't expect to get caught, she cried. You were supposed to be the smart one, the winner. A winner wouldn't have let this happen. He would have covered his tracks. The tracks were covered, Todd snapped, slamming the glass down on the marble coffee table. The sound cracked through the tense silence. The problem isn't the tracks, Brenda. The problem is your idiot son. If he hadn't been so stupid, so entitled, if he hadn't pushed his father to the breaking point, Jack never would have started digging. This is on Leo, and it's on you for raising him to be a useless parasite. The cruelty of his words hung in the air between them. Their partnership had been built on the shared spoils of victory, on mutual admiration for each other's cunning. It had never been tested by defeat. Now, under the first real pressure, it was shattering like cheap glass. They weren't a team. They were just 2 accomplices, and the police were at the door. So what do we do? Brenda whispered, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a desperate pleading. They want a meeting. They're talking about litigation. My name is on that company, Todd. Our reputation. Todd stood up, straightening his shirt. He was reassembling his mask of control. We do nothing. He said, his voice cold and final. I will handle it. I will contact my lawyer in the morning. You will not speak to Jack. You will not speak to Leo. You will not speak to anyone. You will do exactly as I say. Your panic is a liability I can't afford right now. He walked past her towards his study, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the vast, silent room. She looked at his retreating back at the man she had lauded as a winner, and for the first time she saw him for what he was, just another man terrified of losing. And the fear she felt was no longer just about the money or the lawsuit. It was the terrifying realization that she had tied her fate to a sinking ship, and the captain was about to save himself first. The weekend passed in a profound and unfamiliar silence. I spent the time in my garden pruning back the dead branches from my rose bushes, the methodical work a quiet parallel to the actions I had taken during the week. I did not hear from Leo. I did not hear from Brenda or Todd. I knew, however, that the silence was not peace. It was the tense, breathless quiet before a storm breaks. The storm arrived at 7 o'clock on Sunday evening. My phone rang, and Brenda's name illuminated the screen. I had been waiting for this call. I let it ring 3 times before answering a small assertion of the new terms of our engagement. Jack, I said. Jack, oh thank God. Her voice was a frayed wire of panic. The smooth, condescending tone she usually reserved for me was gone, replaced by a high-pitched, desperate whine. What are you doing? What in God's name do you think you're doing? I did not answer her question directly. Brenda, I said, my voice even. You sound upset. Upset, she shrieked. Of course I'm upset. Our son is here in my living room looking like a ghost, he says. You've taken everything from him, his car, his apartment, his money. Are you trying to destroy your own child? It was a classic manipulation tactic, frame me as the aggressor, herself as the concerned mother. It was a role she played well. But I wasn't in the audience anymore. Leo is 24 years old, Brenda, I replied calmly. He is perfectly capable of finding his own apartment and managing his own finances. I am simply giving him the opportunity to do so. And this letter, she continued, her voice cracking. This threatening letter from some lawyer talking about B&T Holdings. What is that? What is this all about? You're trying to ruin me, aren't you? After all these years, you're trying to get some kind of sick revenge. I let her accusations hang in the air unanswered. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to confront the hollowness of her own feigned ignorance. I could hear her ragged breathing on the other end of the line. I am not trying to ruin anyone, Brenda, I said, finally, my voice low and steady. I am just tidying things up. There are some financial matters that have become untidy. I'm simply looking for a little clarity. Clarity, she repeated the word, sounding foreign in her mouth. This isn't clarity, Jack. This is a declaration of war. No, I said. It's an invitation to a meeting, a chance to discuss these untidy matters in a civilized way. My lawyer's office, 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. I assume you received the details. I'm not going anywhere near your lawyer, she spat, but there was no conviction in her voice. It was the bluff of a player with a losing hand. This is harassment. It's a simple business meeting, Brenda, I said, and now I allowed a sliver of ice to enter my voice. The final move, the checkmate. You should be there, and tell Todd to come along. I paused for a beat, letting the implications of my next words sink in completely. I think he'll be very interested in what we have to discuss. I didn't wait for her reply. I didn't need to. I could feel her terror vibrating through the phone. I ended the call, leaving her alone with my quiet, simple, and utterly devastating invitation. The final confrontation was now set, and they would both be there. They had no other choice. The conference room was as cold and silent as a tomb. It was a smaller, more intimate version of Angela Rossi's office, with the same minimalist furniture and the same intimidating panoramic view of the city. We sat around a long, polished black table that reflected our strained faces like a dark mirror. I sat on one side with Angela. On the other side sat the fractured remains of my former family. Leo was a ghost. He was slumped in his chair, his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the blank surface of the table in front of him. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. The expensive clothes he wore now hung on him, remnants of a life that had been abruptly canceled. Beside him, Brenda was a portrait of barely controlled panic. She sat ramrod straight, her hands clenched in her lap, her face a pale, tight mask. She avoided looking at me, her gaze darting around the room as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. And next to her was Todd. He was trying for an air of defiant boredom, leaning back in his chair with one arm casually draped over the back. But the facade was paper-thin. A tiny muscle pulsed in his jaw, and his eyes, usually so full of smug confidence, were hard and watchful. They were not here for a discussion. They were here for a sentencing. Angela Rossi let the silence stretch, a tactic designed to let their anxiety build. She sat at the head of the table, a slim folder in front of her. She was the picture of calm, professional authority. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she opened the folder. The soft rustle of paper was the only sound in the room. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice crisp and devoid of any emotion. She wasn't here to mediate. She was here to dictate terms. "We are here today to discuss certain financial irregularities concerning the Educational Trust Fund established by my client, Mr. Jack Callahan, for the benefit of his son, Mr. Leo Callahan." She slid a document across the table. It was a copy of the trust agreement. "As you know," she continued, her gaze sweeping over Brenda and Todd, "this trust was established with the specific, legally defined purpose of funding Leo's higher education and reasonable living expenses during that period. The terms are very clear." She then slid a second document across the table. It was the bank statement showing the 48 consecutive payments of $2,000. "What is less clear," she said, her voice remaining perfectly even, is the purpose of these regular monthly payments totaling $96,000 made from an account funded by the trust to a private corporation. She paused, then slid a third and final document onto the table. It was the printout of the B&T Holdings LLC registration. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the section listing the managing partners. A corporation, as you can see, that is owned and operated by Ms. Brenda Callahan and Mr. Todd Sterling. In legal terms, when a party in a position of trust, such as a parent, directs funds intended for a beneficiary to a company they themselves own for services that were never rendered, it is not referred to as a management fee. It is referred to as misappropriation. It is a profound breach of fiduciary duty. Brenda made a small, strangled sound. Todd's face had become a mask of stone. Mr. Callahan is a reasonable man. Angela went on, her voice like chipping ice. He has no desire for a prolonged public and potentially damaging legal battle. He is not seeking repayment of the misappropriated $96,000. He is simply choosing to close this chapter. She looked directly at Brenda and Todd, and her voice dropped slightly, carrying a new weight of finality. However, a breach of this nature gives the trustee, Mr. Callahan, certain unilateral rights to protect the remaining assets of the trust from further mismanagement. This was it. The twist. The move they could never have seen coming. Therefore, Angela announced, closing the folder with a soft, definitive click. As of 9 a.m. this morning, Mr. Callahan has exercised his right as trustee. The entire remaining principal of the Leo Callahan Educational Trust has been dissolved, and its assets have been transferred. They have been moved into a locked long-term retirement annuity in Leo's name. The funds will be inaccessible to anyone, including Leo himself, until he reaches the age of 60. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a guillotine blade having fallen. Brenda's mouth hung slightly open in disbelief. Todd's mask of control finally shattered his face, paling a look of pure, impotent fury in his eyes. The money they had been farming, the future income stream they had counted on, had just vanished into thin air, locked away for the next 36 years. They had been outmaneuvered not just financially, but legally, in a way that left them with no recourse. In that moment of stunned silence, I turned and looked at my son for the first time. He was looking at me, his eyes filled not with anger, but with a hollow, bottomless despair. He had lost his future twice in 1 week. "I will not see you on the street," I said, my voice quiet, but clear, cutting through the tension. I was speaking only to him. "This is my final offer. I will pay the deposit and the first 6 months' rent on a small studio apartment. I will also pay the tuition for a 1-year business administration course at the community college. After those 6 months, you are on your own. There will be no more money, no car, no credit cards. This is not a negotiation. It's a lifeline. I suggest you take it." Brenda and Todd left without another word. They didn't look at each other. They didn't look at me. They walked out of the room like two defeated soldiers, their shared conspiracy now the very thing that would drive them apart. Angela Rossi gathered her papers, gave me a small professional nod, and discreetly exited, leaving just Leo and me alone in the silent, glass-walled room. He didn't move for a long time. He just sat there, staring at the empty space where his mother and her husband had been. The ghost, the failure, the boy who had lost everything. Finally, he lifted his head and looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, but for the first time in years, they were clear. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. All that was left was the raw, painful truth of his situation. "Dad," he said, his voice quiet and hoarse. "I'm sorry." It was just 3 words. There was no long, dramatic speech, no excuses, no justifications. Just a simple, unadorned admission. It wasn't enough to heal the years of disrespect, but it was a start. It was a single, solid stone placed on the barren ground, a place from which something new might eventually be built. Later that day, I sat alone in my garden. The afternoon sun was warm on my face. I didn't know if Leo would take my offer. I didn't know if he would truly change or if this brutal week was just a temporary shock to his system. Rebuilding a life and a character is a long and difficult road, and he would have to walk it himself. My job as his financier was over. My job as his father, it seemed, was just beginning, but on entirely new terms. I didn't feel like a winner. There is no victory in dismantling your own son's life, even when it's necessary. There was no joy in exposing my ex-wife's greed. There was only a quiet, profound sense of rightness. I had finally done the hard thing. I had chosen the painful truth over the comfortable lie. I had established boundaries where there had been none. The old Jack, the man who paid for peace at any price, was gone. I looked around at the garden I had built with my own hands, at the house Sarah and I had made a home. I had not acted out of anger or a desire for revenge. I had acted as a custodian, a guardian of the life and the values she and I had built together. I had simply restored order, not with a raised voice, but with a spreadsheet, a lawyer and a father's difficult, unwavering love. And in the quiet of my own backyard, I finally felt the one thing that had been missing for so long, a sense of peace, my own peace, earned and paid for. This story teaches us that there is a fine line between helping and enabling. True love for our children isn't measured by how much we give them, but by our courage to prepare them for the real world. Allowing disrespect and entitlement to grow unchecked, funded by our own generosity, isn't kindness. It's a quiet betrayal of our duty to teach them responsibility and self-worth. Sometimes, the most loving thing a parent can do is to say no, to take a step back, and to let their children face the consequences of their choices, allowing them to build their own strength. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about real-life justice.